college football has changed more in the last decade than it has perhaps in its entire history leading up to the year 2014. In this time period, we've switched from the BCS national ranking system to the college football playoffs, seen the introduction of NIL and pay-for-play, but perhaps as nothing has been more landscape shifting than college football conference realignment. In just the 2024 season alone, we saw 15 teams as members of a new conference play their first game. In the long-standing history of college football, people have left conferences and joined conferences, but one thing always stayed the same. No matter what, conferences were always loosely centered around geographic region. That was until USC and UCLA decided to leave the Pac-12 and join the Big Ten in 2022. This iteration of realignment began on July 21st of 2021 when the Houston Chronicle reported that Oklahoma and Texas had approached SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey about joining the conference. Just 5 days later, the pair of universities notified the Big 12 League office that they did not wish to extend their TV contracts beyond the 2024 to 2025 season and intended to leave the conference in hopes of joining the SEC. This was the figurative spark that lit the fuse to the conference realignment we see happening now. And while the bomb did go off and left the Pac-12 in critical condition, the foundation for this was delayed nearly 3 decades ago. On June 27, 1984, the Supreme Court handed down a landmark ruling in the NCAA versus Board of Regents in a 7-2 decision that said the NCAA was in violation of antitrust laws by controlling member schools' television rights. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me while I explain this, but this case is really important to understanding the foundation because this case sets the stage for modern-day conference realignment. In 1981, the NCAA began negotiating with ABC and CBS over television broadcasting rights for college football games. Both companies were allowed to televise 14 football games apiece, as well as negotiate with the competing schools individually. The NCAA barred all schools from negotiating outside of this plan, claiming the reasoning behind this plan was to ensure that live attendance numbers remained high and unchanged despite television contracts. The lawsuit came about after the University of Oklahoma and the University of Georgia, both members of a group called the College Football Association, or CFA, negotiated an independent deal with NBC for their television rights. The NCAA announced that it would seek disciplinary action against schools that followed the CFA plan, and these 2 schools took the NCAA to court in the District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma, which ruled that the NCAA was in fact in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The appeals court reaffirmed that decision, and in 1984, the case was tried in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the verdict of the lower courts, and Justice John Paul Stevens wrote for the 7-2 majority decision, stating that, quote, "There can be no doubt that the challenged practices of the NCAA constitute a restraint of trade." Stevens also rejected the defense of bolstering live attendance, writing, quote, "The NCAA's argument that its television plan is necessary to protect live attendance is not based on a desire to maintain the integrity of college football as a distinct and attractive product, but rather on a fear that the product will not prove sufficiently attractive to draw live attendance when faced with competition from televised games." Basically, this ruling allowed schools and conferences to negotiate their own media rights deals without the help of the NCAA. This opened the door for people to leave and join conferences in hopes of seeking a bigger media deal. And in 1990, the first wave of modern college football realignment began. In May of 1990, SEC presidents voted to authorize expansion to 12 teams with the addition of South Carolina and Arkansas. Just a few months later, the Big Ten voted to add former independent and college football powerhouse Penn State, marking the beginning of the end for independent schools not named Notre Dame. Just a few years later, in 1994, the Southwest Conference was the first conference to be buried by realignment in the modern age. Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and Baylor all left to turn the Big 8 into the modern-day Big 12. Now, I want to go back to Notre Dame for a second because Notre Dame is an interesting case study. Since 1990, they've been the only college football team to secure multiple hundreds of $million broadcasting deals, and they've done it all with NBC. They signed this contract in 1991 that gave NBC the right to broadcast all Notre Dame home games. This contract has been reviewed multiple times, and as of recording this video in 2024, this contract remains in effect through the year 2029. The current deal pays Notre Dame about $50 million per year, far and away the biggest for an independent school. College football's popularity has increased year over year, which has set the stage for the massive market it represents today. With conference realignment happening now, much of the realignment has been dictated by the money received from these massive media deals. In 2023, the SEC announced it was signing a 10-year, $3 billion contract paying out the SEC $300 million a year with ABC and ESPN. The Big Ten capitalized on the addition of West Coast schools, signing a media deal worth over $7 billion over the next 7 years between Fox and CBS. The Big 12 begins gets a new contract with ESPN and Fox in the 2025-2026 season worth $2.28 billion that runs all the way until the 2031 season. The Pac-12 still actively looking to invite new members to the conference from the Mountain West, and possible FCS options signed a deal with the CW for pennies on the dollar compared to the other Power 4 conference deals. It's a pretty easy connection to make. Money makes the world go round, and well, college football is no different. After the landmark ruling in the NCAA versus Board of Regents decision, it opened the door for the modern college football realignment we see today. It's turned college football into a massive industry, one that's now fueled by competition and fierce cash grabs. But the cash grab isn't really just limited to media contracts. NIL has become a huge part of the modern day college football landscape, and on the next episode of Petrie Productions, that's what we'll tackle.